All right, well, thank you all so much for coming tonight. While we are going to be discussing a very serious subject, we want this to be a very relaxed atmosphere. And I know we've got some people on the side. Feel free to come into the middle. There's some great people in the room. You may want to meet them, sit next to them. I can't promise they won't bite, but my name is Nicole Hudgens. I'm the policy director at Texas Values. We're the largest statewide organization focusing on faith, family, and freedom in the state of Texas, with over 100,000 supporters across the state. And we work a lot in the Texas Capitol. We work with the courts, and we also work in the court of public opinion, the media. And we really have a strong statewide focus. But as many of you know, that what happens at the local areas impact the discussions and the legislation that takes place at the Texas Capitol. And many times we'll have people call our office with concerns of what's happening at their local city council or in their school district or at their county commissioner meeting. And they'll call us and they'll ask us to get involved with what's happening. And our focus on policy is on life, marriage, religious freedom, and human sexuality. So we worked tirelessly during the legislative session on those issues. You may have heard of the Save Chick-fil-A bill. We worked on pro-life issues. We worked on trying to get more transparency in the SHAC. We wish those bills would have gone through. You'll hear a little bit more about what the SHAC is and why it's important, and for you to know what's going on. But again, just want you to feel welcome here. Again, so thankful to partner with Oak Meadow Baptist Church. So appreciative to be here. And then, of course, with Concerned Parents of Texas, you guys are doing amazing work. And so Texas Values got involved with what's happening in AISD as we continue to get calls from parents. Carol, you and your team have been a great resource for us because you've been on the ground consistently monitoring what's happening in Austin ISD. And y'all have probably heard the saying, as Texas goes, so goes the rest of the nation. Well, what happens in Austin has a huge impact on what happens at the Texas Capitol. And we're continuing to see where these controversial issues and these political agendas are being pushed on the next generation and on our children. And when it comes to the issue of sex education, we want to make sure that parents should be the first educators for their children. Parents should be the ones deciding what their child is taught, how their child is taught, when their child is taught these important issues. Every child is different. And so it's important that parents are the primary educators when it comes to these issues. When it comes to what's happening at the school, though, the schools, unfortunately, parents don't know what is being pushed at the local level, what's actually happening behind closed doors in the schools. We've even seen where parents have tried to look in like Fort Worth ISD, what was being taught to their students. And educators, the superintendent seemed to be violating the law by not letting parents actually have access. So the Attorney General had to send in a letter. Austin ISD had some major concerns with transparency. Parents on both sides of whatever political aisle you want to draw were upset because they were finding out after the fact, after things were being done. And you'll hear more about a survey that was sent, and it sounded really nice. Wow, a survey is being sent so parents can have an input on sex education, only to find out that, frankly, it was a skewed survey. So you're going to hear a lot tonight, but we want to create a discussion on first helping you understand what is sex education, how is it formed, why is it important that you know what's going on, that you know about the actual curriculum that Austin Independent School District is teaching and proposing to teach, and then what is a SHAC? How does that entity determine what's going to be taught? What's been happening in Austin ISD, and how are parents going to be informed of what's happening? So you're going to hear a lot of information. We've got some great resources in the back that I encourage you to look over, to read, take those resources home, study them. And what we hope tonight is that we equip you with information so that you can have a voice at the next school board meeting, August 26th, so that you can be able to talk to your school district member about this. We know that already 1,500 messages have been sent that we were able to track. 1,500 messages have already been sent to Austin Independent School District of parents who are concerned about these issues. But it's important that we continue to educate ourselves and equip ourselves so that we continue to be a voice for our kids. So I want to first introduce a very special guest, Monica Klein. Monica was the former comprehensive sex educator and a Title X training manager for Texas and Arizona, or New Mexico. In New Mexico, I apologize. Texas and New Mexico. She has fantastic resources, and I'm excited that you get to hear from her about basically the foundations of sex education. Thanks, Monica.
Yeah, thank you. If I can get my slides up, that'll be really helpful, because I'm not sure that y'all all have the slides. Oh, they're up there. Okay, I may have to stand up so I can actually look at them, if that's okay. Is that okay? Okay. They weren't printed because I got them in. So my name is Monica Leal Klein, and I'm a former comprehensive sex educator. So we're actually talking about comprehensive sex education in your schools right now. That's what everyone's worried about. So I was a comprehensive sex educator for over 10 years until it took me that long, until I finally figured out that this was actually unhealthy for our children and really for our communities. And I ended up leaving. Actually, the last straw was when Planned Parenthood told me, as I was teaching them about human trafficking, that cases of statutory rape were now considered human trafficking, and that it was important for them to report that and protect these young girls. And they said, we're not going to do it, because if they're not with this guy this month, they'll be with another one next month. So they didn't see our children as victims. They saw them as willing participants in sexual activity with adults. And that was my last straw, and I left. That was in 2009, and I've been speaking now as a pro-life speaker for over 10 years. And I formed It Takes a Family. And next slide, please. And what I want to talk to you a little bit is about sex education, the various health models, so that you understand what they are. So comprehensive sex education is also considered risk reduction education. Another health model is sexual risk avoidance and sexual risk avoidance plus. But I also want to emphasize the importance of parents and family, because that's greatly ignored in comprehensive sex education. Next slide. So as you see here, here are the different risk reduction, or AKA comprehensive sex education. So anytime you hear those two terms, they mean the same thing. Then risk avoidance is eliminating all health risks. You're already familiar with risk avoidance health models. That's like smoking cessation or just don't do drugs. It is a proven health model. It's actually a primary health model that is used for many things. It eliminates the risk so that we don't have the negative consequences of whatever the behavior is. It has, as far as our public school system and the education that's being put out by Planned Parenthood and such, has never used a risk avoidance model. They've only used a risk reduction model. Risk avoidance plus is talking about risk avoidance, but still talking about contraception and using contraception and condoms and such. And then the last one that I emphasize and concern parents of Austin, of Texas as well, is parent-led education, which I'm a big proponent of, because it is not outside of your ability to learn about these things and talk to your children and actually have a lifelong conversation with them about this. Next slide, please. This is a wonderful, I hope you have this in your notes there, but this is really talking about abstinence-only education, abstinence plus education, and comprehensive sex education, a comparison. And as you see here on the left side, the SRA abstinence, the emphasis is to devote 50% of page content to promoting abstinence. Abstinence is also risk avoidance, so avoiding the risks, okay? The focus is, again, the elimination of the risk. The message is very much about waiting until our children are old enough to take on that responsibility, preferably in marriage. And the philosophy is that teen sex or casual sex can be problematic, even with the contraception use, because we are still having the issue with STDs. and as well as negative emotional consequences. The other part of the philosophy for abstinence education is to arm with full information about the risks of teen sex and the benefits of abstinence, because teens can and do choose to refrain from having sex. And the goal is really to delay sexual initiation, preferably again until marriage or a renewed abstinence. When we go into the abstinence plus, that means that they'll talk about abstinence, but they'll still say, well, just in case you decide to have sex, then here's information about contraception. Just in case, then here's information about condoms. Just in case, you know, here's this information. So it kind of flips-flops. So I would think that sometimes it's a little bit confusing, but at the same time, it's still medically accurate. Now, SRA education, just so that you know, current SRA education still is medically accurate. So we still talk about sexually transmitted infections, how they're transmitted, HIV, pregnancy, biology, anatomy, all of that is still taught to the children. But there's a big piece of it that is not taught, and that's what I'm going to give you some, hopefully there isn't, I don't see any children here, I'll tell you more about what comprehensive sex education teaches. It is very different, starkly different from sexual risk avoidance. On the other end, you see sexual risk reduction or comprehensive sex education. Majority of those curriculums are going to be focused on sexual activities, the use of condoms, contraception, testing, treatment, and referrals for abortion. Because they do know that risk reduction does not eliminate a risk. So they know that there's still going to be sexually transmitted diseases. They know that at some point the kids are going to conceive a child. And so it's not foolproof whatsoever. So it's still, so really the majority of that curriculum is talking about all sorts of sexual activity. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit more about the philosophy of comprehensive sex education. So this is how I was taught as a comprehensive sex educator. I started in 1996, I believe, as an HIV prevention educator in East Austin. I was trained by Planned Parenthood to reach out to teenagers. And so basically I was doing comprehensive sex education for many, many years. And the way that comprehensive sex educators are taught is that we are to, for example, this is my audience, whether you're young people or regardless of your age, I am to assume that you've done everything and anything when it comes to sex, and my job is to teach you how to do it safer. Now, because you may be inhibited and not tell me what you're doing, I need to cover every detail. So that means I'm going to talk about oral sex, I'm going to talk about vaginal sex, I'm going to talk about anal sex, I'm going to talk about body piercings, I'm going to be graphic only because I want you to know the truth. I do want you to know that I don't mean any disrespect, but what I'm about to tell you is exactly what we told teens. So if they can hear it, which I don't think they should, you need to hear what they're hearing. So when it comes to body piercings or tattoos, we go as far as talking about, well, if someone were to come onto a tattoo or a body piercing, that is an open wound, that is an open avenue for an infection. So we talk about every detail. Anal sex is talked about. What I was taught in the 90s is that many young girls are participating in anal sex to protect virginity or to protect against pregnancy. At that time, I don't really know that a lot of girls were actually doing that, to be honest, but it's something that we were told that we had to teach. And so we would talk about anal sex as a legitimate sexual activity. So whether those young girls or boys knew anything about anal sex, they were now introduced to anal sex. So their philosophy is really different. Their philosophy is that youth have sexual rights. And you can see that on a website called Future of Sex Education. And there are several, SECUS, Cardia, who I used to work for, several organizations, including Planned Parenthood, who are part of this future of sex education. So they believe that youth have sexual rights. They don't say it's apart from parents, but if you were to read through their philosophy, parents are not part of the picture. All forms of sex and sexuality are healthy. Reducing the risk is the only option because abstinence is unrealistic and not a healthy expectation. National standards trump parental and familial standards and values. Sexuality should be encouraged and explored without limits, and consent is redefined to simply agreeing. So where we know that consent by law is within a certain age range, in Texas it's 17. For them, it's just simply, did you agree to do it? Which is why Planned Parenthood in 2009 said that the cases I was talking about were not cases of human trafficking because they were consenting to have sex with adult males. So their view of our children is very skewed, very distorted, and very unhealthy. Their approach then is to emphasize the sexual rights and activism. So part of the presentation with the kids is to tell them, you have sexual rights and you need to fight for those rights. And it gives them a sense of purpose. All sexual activities are condoned and taught. Reducing risk with condoms, contraception, testing, treatment, and abortion. So again, they know that this education won't truly protect them. And so they do tell the kids, you need to come in every 3-6 months to get tested and get treated for any STIs. If you go to the CDC, you'll see that in 2017, the STD rates are continuing to increase. They're at a point where they're feeling that they're not just a feeling, but the data supports it is now an epidemic. Gonorrhea only has one medication that can treat gonorrhea because it's become resistant to all the other medications. So they're actually in a panic now. And when you look at that data, you'll also see that the population that is mostly hit with these high rates of STIs and HIV are 15 to 25. It's our youth. A big part of comprehensive sex education, because they believe, really, honestly, their big answer is condoms, lubrication, get tested, get treated, over and over again. So the only behavior that they're really trying to change is for the young people to use condoms. So basically, in order to use condoms, they believe it's necessary to eroticize the use of condoms. So they teach the children, and I believe some of you might be talking about this today or have some examples in the slides. They actually will teach through role play and different activities on how to eroticize the use of condoms to get the partner to get excited enough to agree to use it. So they are being taught all kinds of sexual activities, and they're also being taught how to eroticize it to increase the chances of using those condoms. And all of this reduces the role of the parent. So as a Title X training manager, towards the end of my career, I was the Title X training manager for Texas and New Mexico. And my job was to train clinicians and educators as well. And a big part of that was client-centered care, and that was counseling. And the reason the counseling is so important is because when a young person comes in, and you're my young person, when my young person comes in, I'm gonna say, you know what, I understand that, you're probably nervous about this, you're considering getting sexually active, probably because she's told me, okay. And I know that you're probably worried about your relationship with your parents, if they're gonna be upset with you, are you worried about that a little bit? Yeah, because sometimes parents are protective, and so I can understand that, but you are becoming sexually active, so I'll tell you what, don't worry about that. We can take care of this. Your parents don't need to know about it. It's important that if you're sexually active, we need to make sure that you're on the pill and that you're getting tested and treated for any STIs. So they start to talk to the kids and really get their trust. And they create a barrier between the child and the parent. And the reason I created the organization, It Takes a Family, is because one of the things that Planned Parenthood always repeated at every training and every conference that I put on for them was the warning that parents are a barrier to service. So the only good parent to Planned Parenthood is a parent who submits to their ideology. Then you're a good parent. If you bring them into the clinic, if you get them condoms, if you let them have sex in your house, then you're a good parent because you're supporting the youth's sexual rights. Otherwise, you're a barrier. And they will counsel those kids and use their natural, concern of having their parents be upset with them against them. And so now they start to separate the child and the parent has no idea about the health care that their child is getting at a Planned Parenthood or other clinic. Next slide, please. Now, this is what's interesting. So this is an image from Ascend. Ascend is an organization that trains people to become sexual risk avoidance specialists. And this actually shows that the kids, when they were asked and polled about comprehensive sex education, they actually said that they felt pressured by comprehensive sex education to have sex. So when people say, oh, this education doesn't push sex, it doesn't make them have sex, well, the kids are saying they feel pressured to. So one of the examples that I'll share the example at the end. Teens feel more pressure to have sex from this type of sex education than even from their girlfriends or boyfriends. So this education pressures them more, they say, than even their own peers. Next slide, please. Now, this is an important graphic because you won't see this at a Planned Parenthood or in comprehensive sex education. This has been put out by the Medical Institute for Sexual Health. And they got this data from the CDC. And they've put it together so that it's easy for us to understand. But basically, condoms reduce the risk, if used correctly, for all of these different STIs by that percentage. So when you hear a Planned Parenthood say that condoms are 99% effective, or I don't know if they say 95 or 96% effective. I want you to see that condoms, according to the CDC, condoms reduce the risk of transmitting HIV by 85%. Chlamydia, it's reduced by 50%. Gonorrhea, 50%. Syphilis, 50%, herpes, 30%, because that's skin-to-skin contact, and HPV up to 70%. But yet, when the kids are listening to this, they're not looking at those percentages. They're not even talking about those percentages. They're letting them know, oh yeah, condoms help reduce the risks greatly. That's what they hear. It greatly reduces the risk, especially if you know how to use it correctly. So let's start the condom activity. Let's learn how to put on a condom. Because if you use it correctly and you use it every time, they greatly protect against sexually transmitted infections. We know that teens aren't going to use them correctly every time or use them every time, and they do not greatly reduce the risk either. So they're getting false information. Next slide, please. Sexual risk avoidance is basically that, eliminating all of the risks. So the philosophy truly is to protect the child's health by eliminating risks. The focus is optimal health, mental, emotional, physical, relational, and academic. We're looking at the whole child when we talk about risk avoidance. Comprehensive sex education says that they do, but when you look at the curriculum, they do not talk about relationships. They do not talk about the emotional state of a child and how it affects them when they start having sex at a young age. Majority of the young people actually say that they regret having sex at a young age and wish they had waited. It also has, sexual risk avoidance does have medically accurate information that empowers teens to choose avoiding the risk. The approach is puberty and sexual health are normal. STI education and data, all of that is still shared with them. Relationship and dating health. It gives youth permission to say no and wait until they're older, preferably in marriage. Supports youth academic achievements, because we know that when kids are able to focus on academics and their future instead of concerns about sexually transmitted infections or unplanned pregnancies, they perform better academically. They are future focused, achievable goals in academics, relationships, and career, and there's a lot of positive role models that are teaching SRA. Next slide, please. And I'm sorry I'm going quickly. I just want to make sure everyone has time. One of the things that is really important about SRA is the success sequence that the Bookings Institute talked about. We've shared this with our legislators at the Capitol as well. The research shows that if these 3 norms are conducted by a person completing high school, working full-time, and waiting until the age of 21 before marrying and having children, they only have a 2% chance of ever living in poverty. In other words, it actually helps with poverty prevention, delaying sex, and focusing on academics, focusing on working, focusing on your future. So not only is it healthy for them physically, emotionally, mentally, but even for their future success financially. Next slide, please. It's important that parents and familial authority have rights. So family values are important. But when you read about comprehensive sex education and their goals, the family is always left out. Or they say something like, actually, this is from the Future of Sex Education that I printed. The word parents is probably used once. And you're supposed to be a partner. That really bothers me when I read anything on comprehensive sex education. Parents are a partner. Parents are a partner. No, parents are the sole authority over their children. And we are the ones that teach them our values, not comprehensive sex education, not our schools, not our local governments, but the family. Family connectedness is really important. So what I teach parents is that, listen, we can't just go on with our day. I know we're worried about work and such. I was a single mom for 9 years. I understand it can be difficult, but family connectedness is so important because what's happening between that counselor and that teen is they're connecting with that teen. They're connecting with them, and if they're not connecting with their parent, and if they don't feel safe enough to talk to their parent about some of these issues, they're going to get it from someone else. So family connectedness is very important. Communication, knowing your children, engaging with them, encouraging them, listening to them. And you need to be educated and have leadership in your home, in your community, part of the SHAC that I know we're about to hear more about, your school board, and even in legislation, you need to know who your state representative is. You need to be able to talk to them because guess what? A lot of this education is becoming required by law. So I'm about to travel to California tomorrow, where it is the law. It is against the law to teach sexual risk avoidance only. Against the law. And the pastor where I'm going to be speaking at his church, he's showing this information to his congregation and saying, you voted for this. You voted for these people. We can't let that happen in Texas. Next slide, please. What do the youth say? This is important. What do your youth say? Well, this is some of the things that the youth have said to me. So when I was a comprehensive sex educator, it was the youth who taught me. I still get chills thinking about it. I was in East Austin teaching at a high-risk school. It was an alternative school. And at this time, I was an HIV prevention educator. So I was talking about oral sex, vaginal sex, anal sex. But before I even had a chance to do a lot of education, a young girl raised her hand. And I'm going to clean up what she said to me, but I want you to hear what she said. She said, ma'am, when I give boys oral sex, I gag. Teach me how to do it better. And the silence that you're hearing I felt that too. I couldn't believe she just asked me that. So I used my communication skills and I asked her, let me get this straight, just so make sure I understand you. You're telling me that when you engage in this activity, it makes you gag and you don't like it. She said, that's right, I don't like it, but if you teach me how to do it better, maybe I will. Comprehensive sex education would teach her, well, are you using a condom? Are you using a flavored condom? Are you using lubrication? And maybe even talk about a few things. This is what I said to her. I said, have you ever considered just not doing the thing you don't like to do? And all of those kids turned around and looked at me. And I could tell they weren't angry and they didn't feel judged. They looked innocent. And I said, guys, do you realize you don't have to do anything that I wrote up on the board? You don't have to have vaginal sex. You don't have to have oral or anal sex. You don't have to do any of it. And another little girl raised her hand and she said, ma'am, no one has ever told us that. Not their parent, not the educators, not the clinics, not the outreach workers, because part of my job was to literally walk the streets of East Austin handing out condoms and talking about HIV prevention. And no one had told this 13-year-old girl that she did not have to have sex. Next thing I know, all of these kids start talking about ways they could hang out with each other and not have sex. And I thought I lost control of the room because I thought, well, my goal here is to teach them about HIV prevention. So I was thinking, oh my goodness, but they were just talking, we can play basketball, we can go to the community center and watch the free movies. They were all for it. All of these boys and girls. Then another little girl broke away from the group and she said, wait a minute, but I already started having sex. I can't stop now. I said, yes, you can. She's like, but everyone expects me to now. I said, you can say no. And you don't have to do it again, ever, if you don't want to. You get to decide. You don't have to have sex. She happily joined the group and continued to talk about ways to hang out with one another without having sex. That was the next one. And then my 17-year-old male was actually my own son. I raised my son completely different. And so I honestly, and I had my son as an unwed mother. I was a single mother for 9 years. At this point, I started to see the education completely different because I had my own little boy. And I asked him as a teenager, he was about 17 years old, I said, Ibri, I was already speaking on this. I said, help me write a curriculum. What do teens want to hear from their parents? Tell me, how to do this. What has worked with us? And he said, Mom, please don't make a DVD or a workbook. We don't like those things. I'm like, really? Because that's what I was gonna do. He said, no, he said, kids want to know what you expect from us. We want to know your heart for us. He said, that's what you've always done with me. You've always spoken to me with your heart. And honestly, that's what kids want. We want to know what parents want for us. So when I spoke to him, I didn't say, you better not do it. No, I talked to him in a different way. I talked to him about honoring not only himself, but the girls. I talked to him about that even if a girl were to make advances on him, that he was to honor her and be that one person who said, no, I'm not going to treat you that way. And so we spoke very differently. It wasn't the finger wagging and it wasn't threats. It was a heart-to-heart talk about becoming a man and honoring himself, honoring others. And that's what kids want from their parents. And concerned parents of Texas, myself, we're ready to equip you and help you and discuss with you how you can do that for yourselves. And I believe that was the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Monica. I think we could take that and just go home, but you're going to actually hear even more important information tonight. I really loved what you said and what you ended on is how important it is that parents have the relationship with their kids. And frankly, when I found out that when parents are involved in kids' lives, and how just statistically that will reduce the teen pregnancies, it'll reduce the drug use, it'll increase their academic scores, it'll increase their probability of doing so much better in life. Protecting the family unit and protecting that parent-child relationship can fix so many of the problems in our society that we don't need the government to fix. Being at home talking with your son is going to not just impact him, but it's going to impact the way that he talks to his friends. It's going to impact the way that he has a family one day. The blessings and the incredible things that can come to because of that conversation are endless. So I love what you shared, how important it is that, and I know I grew up in a Christian conservative home. Sometimes I could imagine where it's a little nerve-wracking for parents to talk about that issue, especially in this day and age. But having a mother and a father who are so willing to talk about it from a heart level, that's going to totally reframe the way that that child sees the issue of sex. They're going to see it from a place of love and a safe place that they can come to and have those deep conversations. So I just encourage you, please take to heart what Monica just shared, and so much important information up there. I mean, the condom rates right there. That's not the information your kids are being taught, unfortunately, in AISD at all. So Carol, Frederick, you have gotten involved in this issue. Did you want to say something, Carol? You want to go first? Oh, Carol Ayala. We have two Carols up here. Carol is a warrior woman. I call her, I've called her frequently over the past few months because she is a former AISD educator. She has been to the SHAC meeting. She's going to explain what that is. She's been involved with AISD and has seen how this issue has progressed in the school district. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Carol.
And it's going to be short, okay? Because Carol, with a K, is going to get into the meat of the curriculum, and that's what you came to hear, okay? Did anybody get the blue booklet that was on the tables outside that says resource booklet? Anybody get that booklet? In that booklet, you're going to see what a SHAC is at the very beginning, and the reason I'm going to point to that is because Monica said, she gave you an overview of what the two different kinds of sex education are. The avoidance, which means wait, right? And the reduction, which means be safer. Have sex and do it safer. Those are the two camps. But actually what the state of Texas says is the wait. By law, in our own state, that is the law. When it comes to minors, we're supposed to teach children to wait. Now, school districts, AISD, and others, if you're in a charter school, this is going to apply to you as well. Because a SHAC is mandatory. It is mandated by the state of Texas that every school district have a Student Health Advisory Council, or SHAC for short. So, what do they do that is so important? Well, they're the ones that deal with health issues, such as smoking and, chewing tobacco, and now vaping, and different health issues, okay? And the thing that was going on in AISD is that they were not following the law, like many school districts around the state. But Austin has 83,000 students. And not following the law. The reason that the SHAC exists is because the majority of the people who sit on that committee are supposed to be parents. Does that make sense? Because they're your kids. And your kids and your interests should trump anything. No pun intended, right? Your interests, your wishes. Now, let me tell you real quick, if you look at that one handout that's in here, you'll see that the SHAC members are the ones, and in this school district, AISD and others, Hayes, Pflugerville, Round Rock, everybody, charter schools, they come up with recommendations for sex education. They take it to the board of trustees, whom we voted for. The board does not have to pass what they recommend. The board can say, go back and redo it. We don't like it, or we like something else better. But they're the ones that vote and say yes, yay, or nay. And that's law. And so in the state of Texas, we're supposed to be teaching children to wait. preferably in marriage. And that's what the law says. AISD will teach kids to not take drugs, not drink alcohol, and now at the SHAC I heard them say they will teach your kids not to vape, but they will not tell your children not to have sex. Very interesting. Now, Carol is going to get into what the big deal is. So, and at the end, don't forget, we do have a question and answer time.
Thank you. Thank y'all for being here. My name is Carol Federick, and as a mom, I was concerned about comprehensive sex ed 25 years ago when I lived in Houston. As a grandmother, I became concerned about it in Austin last year, and I'd like to share my concerns with you. My goal tonight is to provide a brief overview of the foundation of where we are, how we got here, give a few examples of the material that was provided by the district for the community review last May, and also what we can expect for the future. So it's impossible to say at this point exactly what AISD has planned for students to be taught next spring. No one knows for sure, including AISD. The 3 through 5 grade materials that were made available for limited public view in May were all stamped drafts, and there were different versions of those. The parent notification letter that went out last week said the material had been revised based on feedback. The planned resource for middle school, Get Real, has been dropped completely because Senate Bill 22, which prohibits schools from monetary transactions with abortion providers and affiliates, thank you, 86th session of the legislature, prohibits schools from using Get Real. Get Real is a Planned Parenthood product. So while we may not be able to know the content at this point, the Board of Trustees approved the National Sexuality Education Standards to determine the scope and sequence for each grade so we can know the learning objectives and the values that drive them. First, know that AISD does not teach sex ed that is foundationally about biology. They teach human sexuality and responsibility K through 12. So what does that mean? Can I have a slide, please? Oh, I can't see it. So, according to the Get Real information, sexuality includes, but is not limited to, sexual behaviors, sexual relationships, intimacy, how people express themselves, values, beliefs, and attitudes, whom people are attracted to or their sexual orientation, puberty, having children or not, kinds of friends people have, how they feel about the way they look, who people are as individuals, the way people treat others, included but not limited to. In other words, human sexuality and responsibility brings everything under the definition of sexuality. The lesson content will be determined by the National Sexuality Education Standards. So what is the NSES? First of all, they're national in name and goal only. The project started about 10 years ago when 40 committed comprehensive sex ed advocates got together to develop an extensive list of learning objectives and a strategic plan to institutionalize and implement standards, comprehensive, inclusive sex ed in public schools K through 12 across the country. That was their goal. So I do two things when I'm studying stuff. I follow the money, and the reality is there is no money to be made by abstinent heterosexual children. And then I also consider the source. My next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So the 3 frontline organizations in charge of organizing and implementing the project were all committed advocates of radical pro-abortion, comprehensive sex ed that is LGBTQ inclusive. They are Advocates for Youth, basically the youth arm of Planned Parenthood, Answer, an organization of the promotion of LGBTQ for youth, and SECUS, which started as an offshoot of Planned Parenthood in 1964. These three organizations are all social activist groups committed to using sex education to bring about sexual change. Check out their websites. That's what they say on their websites. You can see it for yourself. They formed an initiative, the Future of Sex Education, that Monica talked about, and selected 9 other like-minded advocates for their advisory committee, including Planned Parenthood. So this is the advisory committee. We've got Answer, Advocates for Youth, Planned Parenthood. We've got Gay, Lesbian, Straight Educational Network, SECUS, Answer, SECUS. They stacked the deck. They were not interested in any type of balance or alternative views on what to put in their brand of national sex ed. Planned Parenthood, the largest sex ed curriculum provider in the country, is a driving force behind basically all things sex ed, comprehensive sex ed, and that includes the NSES. They have a long history with Advocates for Youth and SECUS. The end result was that Planned Parenthood and Advocates for Youth were instrumental in the development of the standards, developed the only curriculum to meet those standards, then started marketing their product to school districts, which brings us back to AISD. They had planned to bring the NSES here last year with the Advocates for Youth's curriculum, 3Rs. But when word got out through Concerned Parents of Texas and through Texas Values and all the concerned parents in the district about the materials, parents raised a big stink about it. Come to find out, policies and procedures had been violated and parents had not been duly informed. The district is already using 3Rs. A grievance was filed and the district had to regroup. Did they take into consideration the concerns of parents over the age inappropriate, explicit, graphic, comprehensive, inclusive curriculum that parents had found so objectionable? No, they did not. It was damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, and they designed a survey guaranteed to show community support. Some of you may have taken that, participated in that survey. And the next slide. Yeah. This is part of the survey. The AISD clearly stated their intentions about the NSES. So below were the National Sexuality Education Standards and Performance Indicators, which outline what students should know and be able to do by the end of grades 2, 5, and 8. They were looking for input as to which specific grades were deemed appropriate to address the NSES. This was 3 through 5, and they did not give parents an option to choose that no grade was appropriate. And the next one. Thank you. So this was the first part of the survey, and they, again, were very clear about what they were going to do with your input, which is basically nothing. These are the 3rd through 5th grade National Sexuality Education Standards. All will be taught by the end of the 5th grade. So the first part, one of the key components of the NSES is healthy relationships. And below this screen, we're following 5 questions. Remember again, this is 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. Related to lesson topics that would offer guidance to students on how to successfully navigate changing relationships among family members, okay, classmates, that's good, and partners. So we have 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders with partners.
8, 9, and 10-year-olds.
8, 9, and 10-year-olds. Again, clear. They would all be adopted. The Board of Trustees, okay, so let me back up just a second. So the administration used the manipulated survey to justify adopting the NSES. Okay, are we all here? The Board of Trustees let the district get painted into a corner when they adopted the scope and sequence that matched the NSES, since there were only two programs that meet those standards. Planned Parenthood's Get Real and Advocates for Use 3Rs. Parents had already made their feelings clear about 3Rs, and the grievance settlement prohibited its use. So the district had already started to write their own 3 through 5 curriculum. Then Senate bill prohibited Get Real and forced AISD to begin writing curriculum for middle school. The NSES has 7 minimum areas of essential content and skills that are included across grade levels, with the content of the lessons adjusted per grade level. Okay, it's supposed to be age appropriate. For example, and I apologize in advance for this next slide, please. I am just technically challenged. I'm a grandmother, I'm sorry. I apologize for it. So these are the overviews for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. You can find them in the health education page. And these are the lesson objectives. So I want to come down to identity. Every grade has an identity unit. Students learn several fundamental aspects of people's understanding of who they are. So the 3rd graders learn to identify trusted adults to talk about sexual orientation. 4th graders talk about identifying parents or other trusted adults to talk to about sexual orientation. 5th graders change a little bit. Now they define sexual orientation and romantic attraction. So these are the learning objectives. That's what they want the kids to learn. So how does this work out per grade level? Again, it's hard to know for sure. One draft set of 5th grade lessons had a group discussion activity on doing the right things, and it was fine. But the material that I read at the Science Center in May was a different story. Can I have that one, please? And again, I apologize for the quality. So this was for under identity. It's a large group discussion, and this was the scenario. A student tells you that they like you. You never thought of that person romantically. What should you do? Write sexual orientation on the board. Define sexual orientation as the romantic attraction of someone of the same gender or a different gender. And what should you do in this situation? How does it feel to do the right thing? How does it feel to do the wrong thing, or nothing? So who determines right and wrong thing? What does this mean exactly? It won't be how you would define right and wrong thing, I can pretty much tell you. And AISD was not happy. They weren't satisfied with the information that was in Get Real, so they supplemented gender identity information with material of their own. Could I have the next one? This is the first lesson in 6th grade for human sexuality education. It's a gender match game. And these 11-year-olds are to match terms to the correct definition. So what terms? Gender identity, transgender, cisgender, gender expression, pronouns, biological sex, transphobia, it's one of their favorites, non-binary. The next one, please. And then they have a sexuality match game. Let's talk about homophobia. Straight, bisexual, pansexual, gay, lesbian, sexual orientation, asexual. Again, 11-year-olds. AISD says that their material is age appropriate. Is planting sexual orientation and gender identity confusion in the minds of 7 and 8-year-olds age appropriate? Or making 10-year-olds think that being told by someone that they like them may have sexual implications? Please hear me. Every student deserves to be treated with respect and dignity and compassion. No one should be bullied or made fun of for any reason, but exposing innocent, trusting little kids to material that will cause them confusion and has great potential for harm is wrong. Where's the respect, dignity, and compassion in that? Little kids don't have the cognitive ability to process information about much of anything, much less these extremely complicated subjects that are difficult for most adults and are not settled science. The number of children and youth who are beginning to identify as gender dysphoric is growing rapidly. That social contagion is a contributing factor is showing up in research. And it's only logical. We all know how susceptible children are to suggestion. Research has shown that just asking them questions about social non-normative behaviors can cause those behaviors. The district's student climate survey in 2017 had 398 students who chose to identify as gender nonconforming. I'm sure there are more now. And again, I cannot emphasize too strongly that they all deserve to be treated with respect and dignity and compassion. But bringing gender confusion to the rest of the 80,000 plus student population in an attempt to make the nonconformers feel better about themselves is not the answer. Our children are more than sexual identities, and the insistence by AISD to make all of our campuses about sexual orientation and gender identities diminishes who children are, and it puts every student at risk, including yours. One quick example about the anatomy information that AISD says is age appropriate, and this is my last slide. This is vocabulary. Would anybody just kind of like to make a guess what grade this might be? No? Well, it's 4th. So, I mean, seriously. Cowper's gland, you know, what's that, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds need to know what a Cowper's gland is, you know. And I don't have time to do a lot of the anatomy stuff, but 4th grade also discusses ejaculation with 9-year-olds, and they're forced to discuss that in mixed company. Anal and oral sex for 11-year-old 6th graders, is that age appropriate? Is this age appropriate for your child? Are these your values? Do they line up with your beliefs? Again, we don't know what will be taught next spring. We'll be able to review it when it's approved, if it's approved. Parents were able last year to keep 3 R's out of schools. And there's always a chance that there will be enough concerned parents that are going to get mad enough to be able to keep the NSES out of here this year. I urge you to be contacting your school board member, talk to your principals and teachers, talk to friends. But also be aware that lessons are basically a guide, and teachers can and do improvise. The only way you will know for sure what's being taught is to be in the classroom yourself. You can choose to opt your child out of sex ed, but they will be given lessons in social and emotional learning that will include some of the same information. Bottom line, do not assume that you know what your children are being taught. Sex ed is not my sex ed. Find out for yourself. You're the main line of protection for your children, and they need you to do that. Thank you.
And you know what? I want to add, thank you, Carol. You did so much work. What I want to add to that is this. Teachers can do whatever they want when they have your kids. You know how I know? Because I was a teacher. I can add whatever I want if it's not on there. And I wanted to mention something that parents are asking me all the time. They're saying, when Monica described the SRA and the SRR, in other words, the waiting and the doing it safer, the two camps, the two types, people go, oh, but what's a program that we can share with the district where it teaches kids to wait like the state of Texas requires? And I say, wait a minute. It doesn't make any difference because the district already has the national sex ed standards in place. That's why they put it there. So that anything that even remotely resembles waiting to have sex cannot even be considered. How genius was that? How deceitful was that? So don't even, I'm certified to teach Heritage Keepers. You know what Heritage Keepers teaches your kids? Well, not your kids because you live around here. Other kids in other places, you know what they teach them? They teach them that the intimate, romantic decisions affect every member of their family. Wow, what a concept. That if I choose to have a relationship with so-and-so, it matters to my mother. It matters to my grandmother. Wow, that's stuff your kids will never get unless we do something about it. You do something about it. So now that makes sense with the National Sex Ed Standards. And I have to go back to the 3rd grade. This is the 3rd grade curriculum, 3rd through 5th, right here in my hand. And we have some outside on those little round tables for you to look at if you want to. The very first lesson in the 3rd grade is about, here it says, number 1, the lesson examines membership in a family, the changing definition of family, acceptance of diversity, including one's own. Do you know that the very first lesson for your 8-year-old here in Austin, charter schools, and in this area possibly says, Mom and Dad are not a family necessarily. That's right. It's changing. Get over it. And there are other lessons in there, and there are people in this room can attest to it. There are other lessons in here to say, don't use the word mother, don't use the word father, don't use the word brother, don't use the word sister. Because in order to present a totally different lifestyle for you to accept, for your children to accept, you've got to erase the natural family. That's the only way to do it, is to take your little vulnerable children and change their little minds as to what is a family. And it ain't a mommy and a daddy or brothers and sisters. And that's in 3rd and 4th grade. And that's how it starts.
So that's a lot of information. I just want to recap a little bit just so that everybody's on the same page and we know what's going on. So to go back a little bit, there's 2 types of sex education that Monica talked about. One is promoting that you're going to have sex, and here's some things that may help you risk getting pregnant or a disease. Or there's abstinence is the best choice being emphasized, and that's what should be being taught in Texas schools and in Austin. So the way that a curriculum is decided in a school district is you're supposed to have a student health advisory council. Okay, the SHAC, remember Carol talked about that, the SHAC. That's supposed to be made up of mostly parents, teachers. You can look it up in the Texas Education Code, Chapter 28. You're supposed to talk about smoking and vaping and what sex curriculum is going to be taught to your children. So the SHAC is supposed to look and see what kind of curriculum should be chosen, because every school district is just different. In Austin ISD, they tried to adopt the 3 R's curriculum. It's a terrible curriculum. It's connected to Planned Parenthood. It has some awful situations in it. They were caught not following procedure and policy as they should have. The SHAC wasn't. And we ended up to where they recommended to the school district, correct me if I'm wrong, recommended to the school district that the school district not necessarily adopt the curriculum, but the national sex education standards, quote, national, okay? This isn't by a government, this is by the groups that Carol Frederick talked about. So you have these standards in place, and as Carol Ayala just pointed out, these standards are set unless they're repealed. So whatever curriculum AISD chooses has to now fit within their standards. At least that's what they're saying. The only way those standards can be undone is if the school district reverses them. And that's where you come in. We need to start having those conversations. And they're pretty hard set when they wanted to put these standards in. But they started to get some feedback, and so they slowed down a little bit, and then SB 22, a law that was referenced, specifically states that a local government cannot have a taxpayer resource transaction, meaning the school district can't pay for an abortion provider or an abortion provider affiliate's materials, whatever. They can't buy anything from them. The curriculum that was being considered for 6th through 8th grade was Planned Parenthood's Get Real curriculum. Okay, it's done by Planned Parenthood Massachusetts. Planned Parenthood Massachusetts, affiliate with Planned Parenthood. Therefore, if the school district were to purchase that curriculum, they would be in violation of SB 22. Is everybody following? So right now, what's set in AISD is these standards. But when they were discussing, because the school district has been discussing, what is our curriculum going to look like? They're trying to write it and rewrite it. There was a point where parents were supposedly given the opportunity to review the curriculum as required by law. You are allowed to go look at the sex ed curriculum. But it was a little difficult, wasn't it, David? David is our vice president. David Walls is our vice president at Texas Values and Texas Values Action. And he had a son that was in Austin Independent School District. So, like a very good father, he went to go see what was being discussed and what his child could be taught in AISD. And what he found, I think, is important for you to hear. And anything else you'd like to add, David?
David Walls. Thank you. And I will try to be brief. Hasn't this been some good information? I'm sorry? Yes. Okay. I know there was some postcards passed around, I believe. We're still going to have an opportunity for some questions. So just a reminder, if you haven't got one, I think Mary Elizabeth from our team has got some. Happy to get to those. And we're going to get to questions shortly. I just wanted to, there's not a whole lot that I can add. I think we've covered a lot of material here tonight, but I wanted to speak briefly as an Austin ISD parent and how I've been involved in this process. There's been a lot of information shared about transparency, and let me just say, as a parent, and I stay up to date with a lot of stuff going on, obviously, with the work that we do at Texas Values. Austin's ISD's goal through this whole process has been to keep parents in the dark. And let me encourage folks to say that they already wanted to be done with this decision. The fact that we're even here tonight having this conversation is because folks have been, Carol, others across AISD 1500 that have come through our Action Center have tried to make their voice heard and is making it difficult for Austin to do what they want to do without some of this stuff coming out in public. One of the first things that I participated in was the survey that they sent parents. And as Carol did a great job of explaining, the survey was already, they already had the results. They just needed to hoodwink some parents into taking a flawed survey so they could continue doing what they were doing. Because essentially, and I do have a slide of this. I think it shows it in a little bit better clarity than what was showed. Can we flip to the slides? Keep going. Keep going. The very next one. This was the initial survey. This was a question that all parents were asked. Define sexual orientation as the romantic attraction of an individual to someone of the same gender or different gender. Okay. Effectively teaching and promoting homosexuality. Is that appropriate in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 3rd and 4th, 4th and 5th, 3rd and 5th, 3rd, 4th and 5th? Are there any options that someone sees that are missing? How about none of the above? How about even maybe at a later grade for some of these topics? No, that option wasn't given. So as has been said, AISD used this fake survey to continue the process. I went to several meetings, including one that was at my son's school. And I just have to say, as you get involved in this, AISD is very good about staying on their talking points. I can't tell you how many times I heard national standards. These are just the national standards, national standards, national standards. And I had some private conversations with principal at my son's school and at a follow-up meeting and said, you know that there's no such thing as national standards. As Carol showed, these are radical advocacy groups that have a worldview that is completely opposed to, even in Austin, radically opposed to the viewpoint of most families. That's what these national standards are. And I confronted them about that. And you know, some of them were aware, some of them had just been fed the talking points, national standards. So as folks engage with this, no, that's one of the things you're going to continue to hear from. And then the last point that really kind of started some personal reflection in my family. We've got 3 kiddos. Just one is in elementary school at this point. We went to the meeting at the very end of the school year. It was the last week of school when they had announced they were moving forward with the Get Real Planned Parenthood curriculum, and that they had developed their own 3rd through 5th curriculum because apparently Planned Parenthood's curriculum wasn't even radical enough for them, so they had to develop their own. We went to a meeting. There was probably about this many folks that came to the meeting because it was literally the last week of school. There was one night that parents had the opportunity to come see this curriculum. Okay. They provided 1 copy of the curriculum. 1 copy. They took every individual lesson in all the grades, and they put each lesson in its own binder, and then they spread the lessons all the way across a cafeteria, and then they said, parents, we got a scavenger hunt for you here tonight. I was there for almost 2 hours and did not even come close to being able to make it around and see all the curriculum. A lot of the pictures that you saw up here tonight of some of the more egregious parts of the curriculum were cell phone pictures that I took when I was there, some of the stuff that I just happened to be able to see. Austin ISD is clearly trying to prevent parents from finding out what's going on. And I continue to hope that the fact that we've been able to force them to delay implementing what they would like to implement gives us an opportunity to continue to raise awareness amongst parents. I wanted to just point out a couple of other things, some things that I took pictures of. If you got our handout that's in the back exposed, there's some additional pictures that I don't think made it up into the PowerPoint presentation tonight. But we were talking about mom and dad. Carol's a teacher. One of the things that was in the curriculum was some guidance to teachers on how they're supposed to teach this thing. It is important to avoid terms which refer to only male and female identities when speaking to young children. Goes on. Try not to use terms like mom and dad. What's the worldview behind telling little kids that they shouldn't use the terms mom and dad? I asked that question to some AISD employees that were at this meeting where they had the one copy for us all to fight over. I said, how can you, in good conscience, take a third grade child and teach them that it's not appropriate to use mom and dad when referring to their mom and dad? How can you, in good conscience, teach them to start questioning who they are at the most foundational level, questioning how God created them as male and female? Is there anything more dangerous to be taught to a child than to take the single most biological reality about who they are and to cause them to start questioning that? It's extremely dangerous. And that is the overarching goal of this curriculum. There is a lot of things in it, but it is the overarching goal to push a radical worldview that I fundamentally believe is dangerous. And after having these meetings, even though my son had a great experience at his school this past year, the Lord really worked on our heart and opened up some doors, some prayers were answered, and we were able to move him to a different school. But my heart still goes out to all the kids, 80-some-odd thousand children that are in Austin ISD. We have to do everything we can to take a stand and do the right thing. And so I hope you'll continue to join us in doing that. I continue to urge folks, if it hasn't been said, we have a very easy action alert set up on our website at txvalues.org. You can go there. We have a pre-populated message, and if you send that, it goes to the entire Austin ISD School Board. Continue to encourage folks to take action. It was also mentioned some things that were happening at the state legislature. We also have a new resource that just came out today from our partner organization called Texas Values Action. We put out a legislative scorecard. If you would like to know how your state legislators voted on SB 22, the bill that helps prevent local governments from having a financial partnership with Planned Parenthood, how they voted on some other legislation that was considered in the Senate to help positively reform the SHACs, that information is provided. So I continue to encourage folks to get engaged and to join us in making a difference.
Thank you. You can't leave tonight without doing, what can you do? We have forms on those tables that you can take to your school. We have AISD forms. Y si tenemos las formas en español. Hay formas en español, hay formas en inglés. So we've got Spanish forms, we've got English forms. If you go to a charter, you can take the Liberty Council form with you. Please do.
All right, so questions. I know we've got a few. So James is going to help us out, and also Mary Elizabeth. They're incredible members of our team. Mary Elizabeth is our policy advisor. She's been doing some incredible work, doing in-depth study on what's happening in AISD. And James is our communications associate, working to help get the information out to all of you. So appreciate you guys grabbing the question. And as you're handing me these questions, just want to reiterate the importance of being involved with what's happening. There are school board meetings coming up. There's one on August 26th. You can actually go and testify. Pay attention to concerned parents. I know that they've got information, especially about the SHAC meetings that we were talking about, where though they haven't been transparent, you can go to the SHAC meeting. You can find out what they're discussing. You can go in and you can listen on what's happening, on what they're considering adopting. You can apply to be on the SHAC. I'll never forget being at a SHAC meeting, and they were going to vote on recommendations. I think it was for the 3 Rs, and one of the members raised their hand and said, well, we don't have what we're voting on in front of us. Where is it? And then the SHAC voted anyways, without having the materials in front of them. So there's major concerns with what's going on Again, as David said, we've got an action alert that you can use. Just go to our website, txvalues.org. We've got a policy conference coming up. Carol Ayala is going to be speaking there. We'll talk about it from what's happening from a national perspective. But this is going to be an ongoing issue, and I'll tell you, having worked in public policy, it's good to come to one thing, but this is going to take active involvement. Constantly being aware, checking your emails as you sign up for at TX Values and at Concerned Parents of Texas, finding out, okay, what's the next thing? Because as you know, with AISD, they're going to be sending out another survey. You need to be telling your family, telling your friends to put your information on that survey. And people like David, I know, went through the survey and at the end put in comments. So the first survey was totally flawed. And even in the second survey, like putting in the information, if again they put up something egregious like, when should this be taught, 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade, you know, if you have to put in the comments, none of the above. I don't want my child to be taught this. Some of the egregious thing that's being discussed in these curriculums, I know that I talked to Mary Elizabeth, who's done even more in depth, and you'll see it on, I believe, one of our handouts. They talk about teaching kids, okay, they have role play scenarios, and the children are supposed to get involved and be graded on these things in some of the curriculum that's being considered. You're graded on being a part of a role play situation where children are at a party drinking. So wait, let's not pause. That shouldn't be happening. Why are we encouraging this and having them play out? And then performing things that I frankly don't even feel comfortable saying from where I am right now. Engaging in sexual acts at a party where kids are drunk, that's not a behavior that should be taught to kids or promoted to kids. But unfortunately, that's in some of these curriculums. So that's why it's so important that we understand what's actually being proposed. Y'all give a hand to Mary Elizabeth. She's been doing a great job helping us. Thank you so much. Okay. I'm going to go through these questions, and what I'll do is I'll ask the question and then pose it to y'all, and if you want to answer. Okay. Carol, can you repeat information about what schools are teaching in sex education? The program, I'm so sorry, the programs against us. I don't know if I can read that. But maybe if you can just do a quick overview about what schools are teaching in sex education. Or maybe they meant which schools? Which programs? I think they mean Carol Frederick. The types of do what?
It's called Human Sexuality and Responsibility, and it starts in pre-K. Okay, I'm sorry. It's called Human Sexuality and Responsibility. That's what the program's called. And it starts in pre-K. And of course, in the beginning, it's all about, you know, being kind and nice and getting along with people. This is what it would be at a pre-K level. You know, I was a pre-K teacher my last 9 years of my career. I never did send out a letter from the district saying parents could opt out, which is the law, but we were never given that as teachers. Does that answer the question? Well, the way it works is the way it's supposed to work, yes. Yes. The way it's supposed to work in any school, whether it's a charter school or it's AISD, okay, is you have a SHAC that has a committee that deals with the sex ed. They make recommendations, they pull something together, right? In AISD's case, they wrote it. You know, they commissioned a group, they have written it, and they present it to the board. And they say, this is what we are presenting, should be adopted by you, that you vote on, that we now begin to teach the kids. Because what they did was, it had been about 10 years since they had updated. And that's how all of this came about. okay? And then the board will say, okay, you know, of course, they've done all the work. The SHAC committee that wrote the sex ed or got one or purchased one or, you know, reviewed one. It's a long process. Then the board decides and they say yes or no. And they have not made their final vote, and they are looking at October now because they keep having to make changes for different reasons.
All right, I'll give this to the panel, and if I need to help, just let me know. What does the State Board of Education tell schools about sex ed? Yes, what are the health standards?
You want to do this one too? Well, the SBOE really, the way I understand it, they don't get to tell them a whole lot. The requirements for health education, sex ed, are listed in the Education Code 28.04. And it talks about the SHACs, their responsibilities. The SBOE, we are losing our member here. Ken Mercer is retiring, and they are an asset to call and talk to and voice your concerns. It's just going up the food chain, and you know, you leave no stone unturned. But as to how the abilities that they have, the authority that they have to really change anything is really limited.
Well, and they do say that if you don't like something, file a grievance. That's what they say. Because, I don't know if y'all know this, sex ed is not mandatory in the state of Texas. A school district does not even have to teach it at all.
And I think that answers another question, was are they required to teach it? No. And what's interesting about this question too is that the State Board of Education is about to go and re-review the health standards. There's an active push right now from certain groups that actually want to put some of these radical ideas into the state standards, in the health education standards. So you have the State Board of Education that sets standards, history standards, and usually the standards are kind of broad so that certain curriculums can fit underneath them. You've got the health standards. You're not required to teach sex ed, but some of these far left groups want to come in and they want to tell the work groups that are actually forming right now and working right now that these work groups should recommend to the State Board of Education to add some of these radical ideas to be put in the state standards, not just at AISD, but at the state standards that the state would have to follow. So that's something that we're following really closely at Texas Values, and just sign up for our emails. We'll keep you updated, because as these discussions take place, you have the opportunity to give input. I believe the survey may still be live, where you can actually, is it? No, it's not live yet, or not live anymore, but you can go talk to Ken Mercer. He's done a fantastic job representing our values, but it's so important that we talk to our State Board of Education members, figure out how you as a parent can get involved with those discussions, because the other side is actually coming, trying to change the current standards to put these ideas in. Okay, let's see, we talked about that. Can you voice to AISD even if you're outside the district? Maybe talk a little bit more about people outside the district and how people in and out of the district can get involved. And maybe let's do each person.
I would just say a couple things. One, what happens in AISD is going to impact all the surrounding communities. We've seen it in other issues. So those that might not live in AISD, you need to be paying attention, because unfortunately, what starts here in Austin usually is not good, and then it starts spreading into the surrounding communities. In terms of contacting your member. I mean, most of the school board members, most elected officials are going to pay the most attention to their own constituents. So I would say if you're outside of Austin ISD, make an impact to try to get in touch with some folks that do live in the district that are represented by some of these school board members. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And just to be clear, I wasn't talking about filing complaints. I was talking about encouraging the school board members in how they vote. And so we would welcome anyone to reach out. But in terms of what's going to move the needle for some of these school board members, the most effective thing is going to be folks that live in those districts. But the impact's it's going to impact more than just Austin.
And meanwhile, you need to be talking to your board member, your school board members. It's important to develop relationships before you need something. You have to develop that pipeline to send them information. So I encourage you to, if you're outside the district, contact your own and get it working that way too.
Excellent. Well, because of time, I know we had a few other questions, but we'll hang around for a little bit. Would love to answer your questions. I encourage you, get signed up for emails with Concerned Parents of Texas and Texas Values so you can stay tuned with what's going on. This issue is not just going to go away. We want to make sure that you're informed. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to be here tonight. It's so important. Don't underestimate the fact that what you've learned tonight, sharing that with your friends, with your family members, what's happening in the district is important. Share it with your churches. Let your pastor know what's going on. Let your leaders know what's happening. And don't stop being involved. This is just one step in the right direction. And the more parents we can have that are involved and understand what's happening, the more we have voices that can go to the school district and call for them to do the right thing and to stop this lack of transparency and actually implement something that's going to help our children. Until then, at this point, stay tuned. Speak at the school board meeting. Pay attention to the survey that comes out. Look for the opt-out form. You as a parent have the right to opt your child out of sex education. What you saw tonight, if you're just like, I'm done with it, if you want to opt out your child, you can do that. And certainly go to our websites and contact us if you have any other questions. Thank you again so much for being here. Let's give a huge round of applause to our amazing panel. Thank you. Y'all have a great night.